In space, no one can hear you scream. On June 22nd, 1979, the critically acclaimed sci-fi horror film called Alien was released, and this movie is the origin of the infamous line I just quoted. Despite the film inherently being fictional, this line is anything but, as you can't hear anything in space because sound isn't able to travel through it, and I now think it's important for us to go over how sound works and travels. First and foremost, we need to understand what sound actually is, and essentially, it's a vibration that can only travel through things that are made of the following states of matter: solids, liquids, and gases. For example, let's take this ukulele I'm holding, an object in a solid state of matter. The purpose of a ukulele is to make pretty sounds, and it's designed in a way that optimizes the vibrations made from its strings, which produce sound. The sound born of the vibrations made as a result of me plucking its strings then form sound waves that travel through the air in the room I'm currently in. Opening up the program I used to make the music for these videos, FL Studio, and firing up an equalizer, which is a tool used to analyze and manipulate the frequencies of sounds. At the bottom we can see almost the entire range in which humans are capable of perceiving sound, which starts at around 20 Hz, which is its lowest end, all the way up to 20,000 Hz, which is the high end of the frequency spectrum. The ukulele chord progression I was playing is strongest in the middle of the frequency spectrum at around 200 to 500 Hz and trickles all the way up to the high end of the spectrum at around 10,000 Hz. This little rising sound effect I made using a synthesizer starts at around 1000 Hz but is consistently prominent at the highest end of the spectrum at 10,000 Hz. Lastly, this 808 sample I pulled from 808s and Heartbreak is seeing some action in the 500 Hz range or in the middle of the spectrum. However, it's strongest not only in the lower mid-range from 200 to 100 Hz, but especially towards the way low end of the frequency spectrum at around 50 Hz and even reaches 20 Hz, the lowest sounding frequency perceivable by humans. If we play this crappy little song I made with all of these sounds while taking a look at the EQ, they fill up the entire frequency spectrum, ultimately sounding more full. And now that you have a bit of an idea as to how sound and its frequencies work, let's go back to that 808 sample and open it up in FL Studio's piano roll. Currently, this is how the crappy 808 bass line sounds like. If we put it up 4 octaves, it then sounds like this. As you can hear, not only is it higher pitched, but it no longer resides within the lower range of the frequency spectrum. On top of this, if you're not wearing headphones, then you most likely heard the 808 this time around, since it's no longer serving as a bass due to the change in pitch. And with that being said, you now understand that sound is able to be manipulated, and in this case, I specifically changed the pitch of the 808. The reason I brought all of this up is for you to have a general notion as to what sound is, how it's formed, how it travels, the frequencies of sounds and where they fall on the spectrum, and how sounds can be manipulated by changing its pitch, because since there's a whole lot of nothing in space, sounds really can't travel efficiently. So whenever we do hear extraterrestrial sounds, it's pretty friggin' fascinating, and I now want to show you an example of a pretty weird and oddly disturbing sound captured on Mars. Depending on how a mission is planned, if things go, for the most part, according to plan, a round trip from Earth to Mars should take around 1.5 to 3 years to complete. However, if we actually wanted to walk on Martian soil, we'd have to consider the lack of oxygen in the atmosphere, the incredibly freezing cold temperatures, the intense radiation, and not to mention the potential mental health risk that can arise as a result of being over 100 million miles away from any civilization that could provide assistance should things go south out there. Suffice to say, until these hurdles can effectively be accounted for, a pin should be put into the idea of sending astronauts to Mars. And even though at the moment it's not entirely practical to set up a mission to send humans there, we do indeed have technology that can do the job for us. For example, on July 30th, 2020, a rover called the Mars 2020 Perseverance rover was sent to the planet with the goal of potentially finding any indicators that perhaps could corroborate theories that life at one point did exist on Mars through searching for possible remnants of ancient life, as well as by collecting and hopefully sending back to Earth detect any geological findings. Another piece of technology that was sent in our place was launched on May 5th, 2018, and was a spacecraft called the InSight lander, having landed on Mars on November 26th of that same year. Quote, "The lander was built on the proven design of NASA's Mars Phoenix lander, which was a similar and older spacecraft launched in August of 2007. InSight's robotic arm was over 5 feet 9 inches long. It lifted a seismometer and heat flow probe from the deck and placed them on the surface." The reason I quoted this part of the article in particular is because it mentions how the InSight lander had an instrument relevant to the topic of today's video, its seismometer, specifically referred to as the Seismic Experiment for Interior Structure, abbreviated as SEIS. Essentially what a seismometer does is it detects and measures ground motion or vibrations, and on December 7th, 2018, on one of NASA's YouTube channels, a video containing incredibly deep sounds picked up by InSight's seismometer was uploaded, along with recordings gathered by the spacecraft's air pressure sensor. This is where me having yapped on about the frequency spectrum, where sounds fall on it, and how they can be manipulated is going to come into play since, as I just said, the sounds recorded by the seismometer are deep and certainly fall within the 20 Hz range, the lowest sounding frequency we as humans are capable of hearing, and unless you've been wearing headphones this entire time, you probably couldn't hear the deep sounding vibrations that have been playing in the background this whole time, which were caused by Martian winds picked up by the InSight lander. Thankfully, however, the makers of this video did us a favor by pitching up the deep sounds by 4 octaves, making them audible without the use of headphones, and I'm now gonna let that play out for you. Let's suppose you were able to walk freely on Mars. Not only would you be traversing inhospitable terrain, but the only thing you'll see for miles is a barren land that scientists believe at one point had rippling bodies of water throughout. However, nowadays it's a lifeless desert with thin winds, which are absolutely fascinating sounds to be hearing. In the same way we've sent technology to explore Martian terrain on our behalf, on October 15, 1997, we sent the Cassini-Huygens to explore the second biggest planet in our solar system, that of course being the beautifully ringed yellowish planet Saturn, as well as its moons, 2 of which I want to highlight. But before any of that, let's first talk about the aforementioned Cassini, a spacecraft whose primary objective was to enter the Saturn system, which it eventually did, but not before having flown to other locations in our solar system, such as Venus and Jupiter. Eventually, on July 1st, 2004, 7 years after its initial launch, Cassini became the first ever spacecraft to orbit Saturn. Cassini's primary objective lasted around 4 years, and during that time the spacecraft did lots of things, some highlights being the descent of the Huygens probe connected to Cassini into Saturn's moon Titan, a world full of various bodies of water, with the probe having successfully landed on Titan on January 14th, 2005. On one of NASA's articles about Titan, not only are there images during the Huygens probe's descent into the Saturnian moon being showcased, but if we scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page, there's apparently a file link that very much falls in line with the topic of today's video. Quote, "This recording is a laboratory reconstruction of the sounds heard by Huygens microphones. Several sound samples taken at different times during the descent are here combined together and give a realistic reproduction of what a traveler on board Huygens would have heard during 1 minute of the descent through Titan's atmosphere." And I'm now going to play you around 15 seconds of this audio. Now again, during Cassini's primary mission, lots of amazing discoveries were made as a result of the spacecraft traversing the vast abyss of space, making various pit stops at locations such as the aforementioned Titan, as well as another one of Saturn's moons, Enceladus, with said primary mission having ended in 2008. However, scientists weren't quite done yet with Cassini's great excursion in the Saturnian system, with the spacecraft's life ultimately ending 9 years later in 2017, when it was deliberately plunged into the gas giant that is Saturn. In the same year, September 15th to be be specific, it was the exact day in which Cassini made its grand finale of a plunge, having been completely vaporized and crushed in Saturn's atmosphere. And I bring up this exact date because 2 weeks prior, on September 2nd, Cassini ended up recording a pretty freaking cool sound that's definitely up the alley of an audio junkie like me. And before explaining what's going on in the soundbite, I'm gonna let the whole thing play out for you. In the same way a radio picks up electromagnetic waves and converts them into sound, an instrument hooked up to Cassini called the Radio Plasma Wave Science Instrument, abbreviated as RPWS, allowed researchers to translate the plasma wave recordings picked up by said instrument into the audio file we just got done listening to. And essentially, plasma is known as the fourth state of matter, which in layman's terms is essentially ionized gas, or a gas that has electrically charged particles. And apparently, according to NASA, surprisingly powerful waves of plasmatic energy were discovered moving from Saturn to its moon Enceladus, which once again was in fact audible through the soundbite we just heard. Well, that's pretty much the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you guys learned something, as I definitely freaking did. I did not know what the frick a plasma was. I did not know Bomba Clot Cassini was, but hey, we learn here. Deuces.